Okay, we're going to start the session. So I need someone to assist me in calling people outside, someone with a voice. But people, as soon as you tell them come in, they will come in. Someone is volunteer? Fiona, you know how to be very. I'll go and say, please coming, and they'll be like, yeah. Bob, your voice is very man and no one to assist me. Okay, everyone outside, can you please come inside? You see, it doesn't work. Okay, Arsene is going. You know, he's strong with a man voice. Thank you, Arsene. Okay, all my speakers, my panelists, can you just get on the stage, please? I have Kalim from the NCB. I have SM doing a presentation. Edward Lewis. That's what I'm saying. SM is doing the presentation on behalf of Edouard Lewis. I'm looking for Amrish and I'm looking for Augustin. So the only missing is Kalim, who is promptly going upstairs. Okay. Okay, so I have a request. You do have mics on the table, but for video streaming, it's better for you to be here. So can you repeat what I have said, panelist? So you were not listening. So I think Augusta has been listening. So because of video streaming and people want to see you on the camera and what you're talking, would you mind coming here so that we can... Okay, so we'll kickstart the session with Kalim. Kalim is from the NCB of Mauritius, National Computer Board, and he will be giving us an update on the critical information infrastructure protection framework for Mauritius. Do you want to take question after, just after, or each speaker, or when we wrap up? Okay, okay. After each speaker, we'll take 3 questions. Kalim, the floor is yours. So it's the pointer.
Just check. The first one is for you to move. No. Okay. Ah, yes, other way around. Ah, okay. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Kalim Usmani. I'm representing Martian CERT, and I'm here today to talk about critical information infrastructure protection framework for Mauritius. Before starting that, firstly, I would like to thank AFRINIC for giving me a floor to talk onto this particular topic. I represent Merchant CERT, and before going into the details of the presentation, that what normally country is doing and what we have done in terms of cybersecurity, what policies are there, and on what basis normally we have moved into a shoe where we are working onto the critical information infrastructure protection policy for the country. So we are the national CERT, and the Merchant CERT was set up in 2008. This is the second oldest CERT in Africa, which was set up after Tunisia. And this is the CERT, national CERT, which is set up in the country in order to coordinate information security initiatives in the country. So we are a national CERT. And as I said, that we were set up in 2008. So just let me show you some of our constituency members. Meaning is that as other CERTs normally around the world they work, again, I mean, in a similar way, the Merchant CERT is working, and these are our constituency members. If you just could look at, we look at internet service providers, we look at academia, ICT vendors, media, law enforcement agencies, home users, international CERTs, and of course, I mean, the government sector, private sectors, and as well as including critical information infrastructure. So these are the constituency members with whom the CERT Mauritius works. And in terms of services, there are a number of services which are offered by the Merchant National CERT, and one of the most core services as any particular CERT provides around the world is the incident handling. Meaning is that incident handling is normally done at the level of a CERT, and all these constituency members, which I've just, I mean, shown you before onto the previous slide, they are able to, or they could report cybersecurity incidents, and then normally based on to their requests, we try to resolve those incidents, and then this is how it goes on. So incident handling is one of the core service which normally CERT provides. Even at our level, what we did is that we have been able to set up the cyber forensic lab, because of course what we know is that without having a proper investigation, it's very difficult these days in order to manage the incidents or resolve incidents. So there is a cyber forensic lab at our level which is working, and on the basis of which normally investigation goes on. So before, like for example, how it normally happens, so how do we work and what are the collaboration mechanism which we have on the basis of which normally it goes on. So surely we work along with the law enforcement agencies. So it means that in order to resolve any incident, we have to work with the law enforcement agencies. It means that we are working with telcos, we are working with the law enforcement agencies, and based on to that, normally incidents are resolved. So now my focus surely of my presentation will be that how we are trying to address the critical information infrastructure protection, because looking at the country's landscape, our country's landscape is not really like Ukraine, it's not like Mexico, it's not like US, it's not like Iran, it's not like, for example, let's say any other country where there are different issues. So it means that we have a different issue, and based on to that, there are certain commonality on the basis of which we will be having the sectors which are common. But we need to see that what those sectors are common, and then what we have identified those sectors, and then based on to that, this whole CIP policy will be functioning accordingly. So second service which we normally provide again is vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. So these again are service which is normally provided to the constituency members. It means that this service could be, of course, offered to any constituency members, and they could avail these services provided by the Merchant CERT. So that's VNPT. That's one of the established services which we have, which we are offering to our constituency members, and they are the organizations. And of course, I mean, most of the requests which we get is based on to the organizations into the country. Now, other services which we have quickly, like proactive. So it means we are having a reactive service and we are having a proactive service. And this reactive proactive services, dissemination of virus alerts, advisories, and VNs, that's done on a daily basis. It means that we all know that we and these alerts and advisories are important, and so that people within the constituency, they are able to take necessary precautions and measures, and they are able to apply patches onto their systems which they are running. So I think this is where we are trying to help the community and of course the constituency members in order to take proactive measures in terms of their infrastructure which they are hosting. So this is something one. Awareness campaigns, that's something common. And I believe still that education, cybersecurity is all about education. The more you educate and the better you'll be able to predict. Because what we are saying is that human is the weakest link into a cyber security. So I think this is something, a second activity which we do. And then organization of security events. So surely again, what CERT does is that from time to time we organize international security events. Just last week we organized TC, Technical Colloquium, in collaboration with the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, which is based into US. And there we have been talking about extensively around incident handling and other particular, how we could say, topics into the area of cybersecurity. So I think this was one. Then before that, during the down the line of the year, we organized international security drill. So drill was organized, and that drill was all about how could we have different scenarios projected in terms of handling incidents, and that was again done onto a 3-day basis. So this was again another, let's say, activity which we do. In terms of organizing training, this again we do. For example, we organize training for our local information security professionals in order to train them into a specific area of cybersecurity. So I think this again goes on. And then publications, it means that number of corporate guidelines, they are written, e-security newsletters are issued from time to time. There are brochures and booklets, and then a dedicated cybersecurity portal, same like, I mean, the way Malaysia has, the way Oman has, the way Singapore has, the way India has, we have a cyber security dedicated portal which talks about different audiences. It connects organizations, it connects, let's say, kids, it connects parents, and of course, it connects citizens. So it means that there are different tips available, guidelines available, open source software available that could be taken, different tools available, and then of course, the idea is to educate people around cyber security. So now this is basically security quality and management services. So this is again what we provide. And if you look at that, these are different services which normally we have. This one is assistance to organizations in implementing information security management system. That's based on to ISO. It means that what we are trying to do is that we are assisting organizations. It means that the coordination goes on from our level, that how they will be able to write policies, how they'll be able to assess risk. And I believe in order to implement any information security management system, what is the most important thing is that how you will be able and how better you are able to assess risk, how could you quantify risk, and how the better you could be able to quantify risk, the better you'll be able to manage your ICT infrastructure. So this is, I mean, what we do in terms of assisting organizations in implementing ISO 27001. Now, again, what do we do more is that to conduct third-party information security audits. It means that we assist organizations into gap analysis. For example, let's say if they have to go for ISO implementation. And once they have to do that ISO implementation, what do? We help them to gap analysis. Where are the gaps? And based on to that, of course, that is a feeder to the risk assessment exercise. And once that is done, then surely they will be able to have a better risk assessment. And based on to that, they have been able to put a better controls, and then surely they will be better protected. So I think this is another service which normally we try to provide to the constituency members, and of course is open to organizations in the country. And then the last thing, to carry out technical security assessment of ICT infrastructure of organizations. So I think this is again the part of the third-party information security audit. So it could be like if they want to go for ISO implementation, this is a service. If they want to just have the gap assessment in order to have a better and the secure infrastructure set up within the organization, again, they will be able to do that using this particular technical security assessment. So I think these are the services, some affiliations, curricula, CERT, ME partners and affiliations. And in cybersecurity, we have to be together. And of course, the better we are networking, the better, let's say, we have the collaborations with the different partners, the better we will be able to fight against cybercrime. So it means that what normally the CERT is doing is that we are trying to connect to the European Union in terms of based onto the Glacier project, Global Action on Cybercrime project, where we have acceded to Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. And this, with the accession of Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, we are trying to align Mauritian Computer Misuse and Cybercrime Act with the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. And obviously, what we are looking at it there is that we are looking in terms of provisions like MLA. We are looking at the provisions that how we'll be able to have the real-time, let's say, traffic interception at the level of the ISPs. again, what we are talking about is that the data retention policy. It means that country right now does not have the data retention policy. It means that if we don't have a data retention at the level of telcos, it will be very, very difficult for cyber crime investigators in order to investigate incidents, because we need to have the evidence. And how do we get the evidence? And this is the log. And this is a challenge not only for Mauritius, but this is a challenge for the whole world right now, because data retention normally is not done. It was started in UK last year, where they wanted to come up with the regulation where they could be able to retain data for a period of 1 year, but that didn't get through. And then, of course, this is a challenge. And this challenge is again there where we are trying to talk about. Another thing which country is doing right now is that we are trying to accede to AU Convention on Cybercrime and Personal Data Protection. It means that with this, again, we are trying to cover up the region. And once the region is covered, so we will be able to fight and combat cybercrime effectively. So I think this is again which is going on at our level. So we are having different partnerships. You could just see that CERT in, that's another, let's say, established CERT within the Indian region. Then we are again collaborating with the JP CERT. We have just signed an MOU with the JP CERT last week. We are the member of Africa CERT. We are the member of, let's say, KISA, that's the Korean Internet Security Agency. We are collaborating with the US CERT, etc. Again, we are the part of the impact. And then again, we are collaborating for phishing incidents with APWG, and there are many more private players who are helping us in order to support the combating cybercrime. Affiliations, again, we are affiliated with CERT CC and CERT cities, from where the whole concept of CERT has come up. And then again, we are affiliated to the Forum of Incident Response and Security Team. So I think these are some of our affiliations quickly. And these are the incident statistics. So surely, because I think I'm talking, let's say, in Mauritius, and then I'm talking on the behalf of Mauritian CERT. So these are the incidents. If you look at that, this is the incident statistics which was reported in 2015. So now before, like, these are the incidents, and this statistics is solely based on what is reported to us. So it means that there are different agencies in the country here to whom incidents are reported. One is CERT, one is ICTA, one is the police. And again, there are certain, how we call incidents, that goes to Financial Intelligence Unit, goes to Financial Services Commission, that goes to the Competition Commission of Mauritius. So out of these, so obviously what again the government is trying to do right now is that they are coming up with a centralized reporting system. It means whatever you see right now is just one component or one part which is reported at the level of a CERT. But of course, we want to have a centralized reporting system, and this particular system is one of the recommendations of the Council of Europe, where once you have a centralized system, you'll be able to do a better threat profiling. So it means that this is, let's say, underway. We are trying to set up that particular, how we call it, say, centralized reporting system. So these are statistics. And again, as other countries, they are having the challenge, and that challenge is of incident reporting. For example, if I talk about financial sector especially, financial sector, they are reluctant to report incidents. So it means that you might not see the traditional or the main and the core cyber security incidents. I'm talking about DOS, I'm talking about DDoS attacks, I'm talking about, let's say, man in the middle. I'm talking about, for example, let's say sync attacks. So you might not find, because still they are not reported, and this is a challenge, and this is what we're trying to address. And of course, if incidents are not reported, that's of course a good news. But surely, if incidents happen and that they are not reported, that's damaging to the organization, as well as it could be damaging to the country. So I think this is the stats. You could see that. And still, if you could look at it, fake accounts and hack accounts, that's the majority, because here this is connecting much more to the social media type incidents, which where people are reporting from the Facebook incidents which are coming, and surely they are content based, they are the fake accounts, they are the hack accounts. So I think this is into that particular category. So this is something one is stats for 2015, and normally if you look at this 2016, so here, again, you'll find majority of the fake and the hack accounts. And then surely we are having the online scam. Phishing is there. Ransomwares have started cropping up, and then they are reported. And people, they are having a challenge. Then, of course, I mean, this is what we're going to talk about into the critical information infrastructure protection policy, how this will address to that. So this is, again, some stats again here. And this is for the latest month of, let's say, last month. And again, they're into the similar lines. I mean, they're not very different, but surely there is some paradigm shift. And now what is happening is that mobile-based incidents are reported, of course, I mean, more. And then based onto that, again, we have the similar kind of incidents. So let me move fast because I'm having 10 minutes. Coming back to the critical information infrastructure protection for Mauritius, and I think this is what we need to talk about. And here, why we are talking about is that there is a paradigm shift. And once there is a paradigm shift, so surely we're not only addressing or trying to address the attacks onto the organizations. What we are trying to, if we say that we are talking about zero-day attacks, we are talking about APT attacks, we are talking about the ransomware, but surely the same thing, again, what we are trying to focus right now is the industrial control system type of attacks, where if I talk about, let's say, the recent incident of Ukraine in 2015, where some 250,000 people were affected, where their electrical grid was down. Now, if I talk about, let's say, the Northeast in 2003 in the US, somewhere again, there was a complete blackout. There were some, let's say, 11 people died, and there's so much of damages in terms of, let's say, the cost, which has happened why the whole industrial control SCADA systems, they were down. So it means if you look at the some of the stats which I'm having, and according to the DELS 2015 annual security report, cyber attacks against SCADA system doubled in 2014 and to more than 160,000. So I think, I mean, that's something alarming. And this is a reason why countries and even Africa is moving towards where they have to protect their critical infrastructures. And critical infrastructures could be, of course, we are talking about electrical grid, that's a part of the critical infrastructure. We are talking about the telecommunication sector, that's a part of the critical infrastructure. We are talking about manufacturing sector. So all these are critical. And even if I talk about Sony, for example, in 2015, so it was a whole full-fledged, I mean, there is the focus onto the SCADA systems, and this is where the country is trying to prepare that how we will be able to address that particular problem of managing and then protecting our CIIs in the country. So how we started, this is just like, I mean, we are still into a draft stage. This is just a concept I'm trying to project right now here, and this policy is not yet finalized. This is, I mean, being worked out. So we have inspired from, if you look at this, from 58/199 of the UN resolution, which is talking about the global culture of cybersecurity and protection of critical information infrastructure. I mean, where the policy has come from, and then it focuses on to three main components: leadership, risk mitigation, and awareness. And then, of course, it defines a plan of immediate actions to strengthen the resilience of CIIs, because we are talking about secure and resilient Mauritius, because we have come up with the cybersecurity strategy for the country in 2014, and this is offshoot from this particular strategy where we are trying to set up the CIIP. If you look at this, and this is what critical infrastructure is. We all know this, and critical infrastructure is something what we say that if it is disrupted, it could have a debilitating impact onto the public health, safety, commerce, and the national security. So I think this is what CII is. These are the CII sectors in Mauritius. Okay, so if you look at this, this is, I mean, how we have identified through a particular, how we can say, specific questionnaire, and based onto the criticality factor that has been defined, and then we have come up with the 11 sectors. If you look at this, right from energy till sugar, these are different sectors, and the main goals of the CIIP framework, three things. We need to facilitate the strategy development of CIIP, this is one, and then we need to assist the owners of the critical, how we call sectors, how they will be able to best do the risk evaluation, and then accordingly they will be able to address those contours after the risk assessment. I think this is the second point. Third point is that how to identify and understand sector issues and cross-sector dependency. So this is where we are talking about setting up the C-certs at the level of every particular sector. It means that there's a national level committee, and this national level committee will be set up, and based onto this, there will be C-certs set up into each and every particular sector, and from there, each and every sector will be controlled through the National Information Security Committee. I think this is the key. And then work with the international CIIP or CIIP partners in order to do it better. So I think these are the three pillars. And out of these three pillars, leadership and governance, this is where the policy will be managed. risk mitigation, full-fledged risk mitigation methodologies will be, for example, put into practice. We are talking about, let's say, ISO 27001. We are talking about COBIT. We are talking about BESL. We are talking about BESL 2. So this is again the awareness, and awareness is again important. And based on to these, the different actions or projects which will be identified into the policy of CIIP. So if you look at this, this is how we have tried to put through if government defines CIIP goals. Now the public and private partnership, this is again, we are working on to that because PPP model is the key, and without this, we can't move, we can't be successful. So that's why PPP model is key and the important factor, because all the public and the private players, they have to be on the same platform in order to combat and in order to manage the country's security better. Okay, so this is public and private partnership. Infrastructure we are talking about, so infrastructure of the risk assessment. So we need to assess risk, and then we identify controls and mitigation, and implement those controls, and then measure effectiveness. So that's a cycle, and this will be done through this, of course, this particular policy. That's small, the font is very small, but these are the stakeholders. So this is, what we are trying to identify, these different stakeholders. There'll be a CIIP coordinator. Then we'll be having the sector-specific agency. It means that each and every regulatory authority will be present into this particular, how we call it, a committee. We are having the law enforcement here because, of course, law enforcement, cybercrime component is there. We are having the CERT is there. And then we are having the infrastructure owners and operators of, for example, telcos, they are there. And PPP, of course, private organizations, they're the part of it. And IT vendors and solution providers. So all these people, they are the stakeholders in this particular policy. And this is where how the security risk management at a national level will be dealt. So as I said previously, there will be a National Information Security Committee. This could be another name, but this is what we are thinking about. So this is not yet final, and this will be helpful, or this will be set up to lead and monitor the whole implementation of the policy. This is one. And then again, this particular committee will have members from all these stakeholders, which I've just shown you to the previous slide. And this is what we're going to do into this. If you look at this, assess the status of the implementation of the CIIP policy across the CIEs. Based on to that, the risk assessment methodology will be finalized. Here we are talking about National Incident Handling Policy. Here we are talking about the risk assessment policy. Here we are talking about the National Contingency Policy, that how this could be taken and then how this could be addressed at the level of the national level, so that it will be able to deal with the, of course, the incidents which we have into the country. Now, PPP, yes, and then and develop national contingency plans. Here we are, and this was the flow. And in this particular flow, you could see that how this flow is going on, because identify the threats, vulnerabilities, assess risk based onto that, and then we try to, let's say, have the countermeasures accordingly. So this is where we are talking about the whole flow of risk assessment, and that's the awareness and prevention, which is again the part of the policy, where we'll be having a different way of, let's say, educating people. It means that through awareness campaigns, they are there, through how you could be able to do the risk assessment, how you'll be able to have the standard implementation within the particular sector. So this is, total awareness for all these 11 critical sectors which have been identified. So this will go through the awareness and prevention part, and I think that was the last slide for me, and I'm done with the time. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have questions? No questions? Okay. Anyway, Dr. Kalim will be here. If you want to see him, you can interact with him during coffee break. So up next, I'll call SM to give the update on the root zone DNS key signing.
Good afternoon. I'm Esmun Sami. I'm not Edward Lewis. I'm representing Edward Lewis, who is from ICANN. He unfortunately could not make the trip because he could not find Mauritius on the map. Okay, what is this about? This is about DNSSEC. Have anybody in this room heard of DNSSEC? Okay. Have anybody in this room heard of the TCR, the Trusted Community Representatives? I think we have one. over here, which is Mr. Sistrom, and we have Dimitri, and we have Anna as well. And I don't know, I'm still a TCR, by the way. Anyway, we are going to talk about the DNSSEC key rollover. What it means is that there are going to be a change for the KSK at the DNSSEC root zone. ICANN is going to change it, and it will have an impact for network operators who are doing DNSSEC validation. Does anybody do DNSSEC validation over here? What, only 2 or 3? So you don't use DNSSEC. Does anybody use IPv6 over here? Anyway, this talk, it's about informing you, notifying you that there's going to be a change in 2017, and it's good for you to be aware and to be prepared for the change. So, does anybody know how DNS works? Okay, DNS, it's, you do a query, you ask, for example, you have a name which is www.example.com. Your DNS resolver, which is software, sends a query, and what it gets is an answer which gives it an IP address. For example, what we have here is an IPv6 address. With DNSSEC, what happens is when you send the query, you ask for the address of the server. What you get is you get an answer which is with a digital signature, which means that you can verify that the answer, the integrity of the answer, and you can know that this is the real answer for www.example.com. Validation is validation. I'm going to read the slides because it's not my slides, by the way. Validation includes the process of inspecting the digital signature and the data to verify the answer is the appropriate one. For example, if there were, for example, a man-in-the-middle attack, somebody between you and the DNS server were trying to do something with the answer, you will be able to detect that there's been a change if your resolver supports DNSSEC and if you are doing DNSSEC validation at your end. The signature and the data which is being sent is protected. It needs a public key, and this public key, it's a chain from the root, which means that at the top of the hierarchy you have what we call the root zone. Then you have, for example, .com, .mu, .ci, .za. Sorry, I should not include .za. You have the zones which are DNSSEC signed. And what you need to do, you need to have a trust anchor to verify these answers. Your software, if you are doing DNSSEC validation, your software might already come with a trust anchor. With the change, with the rollover, you'll need a new trust anchor, and that's what we are talking about here. Validation is more than a cryptographic check. It's not automatic. It's about is the answer related to the question. For example, let's say the question is, I want to know the address for www.afrinic.net. And the answer I get is for www.drive.net. The answer is invalid. Okay? The checks which you do allows us to verify stuff like that. We can know whether the answer is fresh or not. Have anybody heard of a replay attack? So Daniel, what's a replay attack?
It's a little bit of a case. On any specific DNS,
Yeah.
basically where you record something and play it back from somewhere else, and it can be someone else doing something when you're actually not that person.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, DNSSEC.
I'll add to your point at the beginning that everybody on this network is doing DNSSEC validation.
Thank you, AFRINIC. Thank you, Daniel. So why should you bother about DNSSEC and the rollover? It's because the DNS protocol, when it was first invented, did not take into account all the security issues. For example, it's easy to forge a DNS reply. There wasn't any protection built into the system. DNSSEC came in afterwards, where they built this protection, and it gives you a base for you to secure other parts of your infrastructure. For example, you can use DNSSEC for email. You can use it to supplement your PKI certificates, X509 certificates. Oops. So what happens when you do a query, when you're doing DNSSEC validation? What it's doing is doing a crypto checking of the signature. You send the query, which is what is the IP address for www.example.com. What you get is you get an answer, you get a digital signature, which is signed by example.com, and you can verify whether it's really an answer from example.com or is somebody doing a replay attack or other types of attack. So I think at the beginning I mentioned that the DNS is an hierarchy. At the top of the hierarchy, you have what we call the root zone. You have the root KSK signature. Then you have also a root ZSK signature. Then you have a signature for .com. You have a DS record for .com. And if you go down, you get to example.com, you also have a DS record. What we are doing is that what ICANN is doing rather, is that it's doing a change at the top. It's doing a change in the root zone where the root KSK will change. Currently, there are around 1,300 DNS TLDs, and there are several TLDs which are DNSSEC signed. For example, you have .org, which is DNSSEC signed. You have .com, which is DNSSEC signed. Are there any TLD operators in this room? No? No? Is your zone signed? What's your zone, by the way? Thank you. Okay, we're talking about trust anchor. The trust anchor is at the root zone. It's at the top. That's the root KSK. Okay, and that's for GTLEs. Are they signed? Are you sure? Daniel, verify. Anyway, a trust anchor is a key that an operator places full faith and trust into for the purpose of verifying responses. It could be implicitly trusted because it came with the software, or it can be explicitly trusted. What this means is that, okay, the software does everything by magic. You have your DNS validation happening now. For example, Daniel from AFRINIC is doing DNSSEC validation on this network. You don't have to change trust anchor because he's doing this stuff. If you are running your own DNS resolver on your computer, or if you're an ISP or operator, you're running your own resolver, then it has to be explicit. It's up to you. If it doesn't come with the software, it's up to you to go and configure the software to put in a trust anchor so that it can do DNSSEC validation. This is explicit, which means that somebody must do a manual intervention. If the root zone KSK the trust anchor? It depends. It's up to you. It's up to you to decide whether you want to use DNSSEC validation, and if so, it's up to you to decide whether you want to trust the trust anchor which is provided by ICANN. DNSSEC in the root zone. DNSSEC in the root zone is managed by ICANN. I think you heard of ICANN. It's responsible for operating the root KSK. Then you have a company called VeriSign, which operates, which is responsible for the operation of the ZSK. Operating the KSK entails signing the ZSK every few months. I think it's every 3 months. One of you guys go to the East Coast or the West Coast, and there's a signing of the ZSK. The current root zone, the current implementation of DNSSEC in the root zone was done in 2010. It's a key, a cryptographic key, which is stored on HSM modules, and there are two facilities for the KSK ceremonies. There's one on the East Coast and there's one on the West Coast. Getting the root KSK. It can be done via DNS. It can be done by through the web, because I think you have a URL on your screen. You'll see that ICANN publishes a bundle which contains the root anchors. You can download it. It's up to you to decide whether you trust ICANN or not. And you can get it by other means. For example, sometimes if you are using open source software, if you are using Unbound, for example, it comes, I don't think, does Unbound ship with Trust Anchor? Does anybody use Unbound here? Yep. Does it ship with a Trust Anchor? Yep. Sometimes the software comes with a Trust Anchor. Sometimes it doesn't come. It's up to you to contact your vendor to figure out whether it contains the Trust Anchor or not. Changing the root KSK. There's a plan, as I told you at the beginning. There's what we call the key rollover plan. It's the first time that a rollover is being done after 6 or 7 years since the root zone was signed. It's something which we don't really know about it because it's the first time which we are doing it. So what ICANN is trying to do is trying to inform you that this change is going to happen. It's going to happen in 2017, and it's up to you to test, to go and see whether your software has problems and provide feedback about it so that steps can be taken to avoid any issues which may happen after the rollover. Oops. So why is there a rollover? We can't keep a key forever. You can't issue a key. It's a bit like a password. For a password, you don't keep the same password for 10 or 20 years. It's good hygiene to change passwords every few months or every few years. It depends on you. It's the same thing for the rollover. You have a KSK, which is some cryptographic code information. You got to change it every now and then, and it's being done after 5 years or 6 years. It's also a way for you to test whether the system is working correctly. If your operations are correct, it should be able to support rollover, because it can happen that there's a problem with the keys and we got to change the keys. Part of the key rollover, it's for security purposes, and it's also for operational purposes to know whether the processes which you have in place are working correctly. Why not a private test? It's because a lot of people are involved in this. A lot of people use DNSSEC for validation. I mean, a few people use DNSSEC for validation, and we don't know everybody who is using it, which means that we got to get everybody on board to understand what's being done, when it's being done, and what can be done to test it. So the bottom line is that ICANN is changing the KSK for the root zone. And for you, what it means for you is that the trust anchor needs to be changed if you are doing DNSSEC validation. And it's good for you to know about it. So if you are doing DNSSEC validation, it's time for you to go back to your software which you installed maybe a few years back and try to understand how it works, what needs to be changed, how do you change the trust anchor, and all. There are some documents on the ICANN website. You can go to the URL. The slides, by the way, are on the AFRINIC website under the name of Ed Lewis. You can download the slides. Please go to the URL. If you have time, please read the documentation so that you understand what's going on. So what's the plan? On October 11 in 27, which is next year, a new KSK will go into use and the current KSK will be retired. Okay, it's not like this is the KSK, this is the new KSK, and we are just switching one off and the other is being used. There are going to be, I think, 3 months when both KSKs, the KSK new and KSK 10, are valid. So you have a 3 months window to make this change. If you are taking a vacation, plan beforehand to make the change. So what are the issues concerning this change? I think you heard of TCP, UDP, packet size and all. When the rollover is being done, it's going to increase the packet size of DNS responses. For example, I think in the test, they found out that it's going to grow to 1425 bytes. It may cause problems at your end. For example, if you have a firewall which is verifying the size of the responses and dropping packets above a certain size, for example, 1280 or 515, it may cause problems for you because your validation won't work. So please test this stuff. I think some of you, or maybe all of you, know how DNSSEC works. Some people have firewalls in front of their networks, and unfortunately, they make an assumption that DNS only works on UDP. To avoid problems, it's good to allow TCP as well, because DNS, it uses UDP. It can also fall back to TCP if the UDP is blocked or the response doesn't reach the server. Please refrain from filtering DNS messages based on size because it will cause problems. For example, as we have seen with this plan to have a KSK rollover, what it does, it's going to increase the packet size of the response which you are getting. If previously you were getting a packet size of around maybe 700 bytes, and you made an assumption on your firewall that all the DNS responses won't grow above 700 bytes, and then you have a rollover coming, you won't be able to use DNSSEC effectively because of this limitation in your firewall. IPv6 fragmentation and DNS. Okay, I think for IPv6, most people have 1280 as their limit on their firewall, and packets are fragmented if the packet is larger than 1280, for example. In this case, you are going to get a response at the ICP, you're going to get an ICMP message which tells you that the fragment is too big. It's good to take this into consideration. Days to watch. The rollover on September 19, 2017, the root zone DNS key set will increase to 1414 bytes for 20 days. Prior to the date, it was around 1139 bytes, which was the IMARC. On October 11, 2017, the root DNS key set will be signed only with a new KSK key. So that's the date which you should watch out for. And in January 2018, the root DNS set will increase to 1425 bytes for 20 days. Trust anchor management. It's a question of how you trust and configure your trust anchors. For example, is it done through configuration control? For example, you're using Puppet or you have some automated software pushing the configuration for DNS. It's up to you to go and check all this stuff and see what needs to be changed. If you have embedded software, sometimes the data, the trust anchor, for example, is embedded in the software. It's a bit like a black box. It's up to you to go and see how this black box works, because it may cause problems after the rollover. It's good for you to monitor what's going on. For example, when you're using DNSSEC validation, sometimes there are failures. Please go and check the logs. I know I tell this to all system admins, but we know that system admins rarely check the logs because they are a bit busy sometimes. There are tools and testbeds which are available for developers and distributors and service operators to do some testing before this rollover happens. Please go to the URLs which are on the screen. You'll find some information. I think there's surely a contact address. If you run into problems, please send an email and there's a nice person who will try to help you out. That's all. Thank you. I think ICANN is on Twitter, on the web as well. Do you have any questions?
Hi, Rob Seastrom. I'm on the Aaron Advisory Council, and I'm also a TCR, a crypto officer for signing the root. And I'm speaking on my own behalf here. Ed did not include a link to the RFC for automated update of the
it's
sign.
RFC 5011.
Right, and that is built into every modern version of bind and unbound. They not only ship the keys with the software, the trust anchor, but the update mechanism is built in. It used to be that you had to include the trust anchor in your configuration file. Today, turning on validation is as simple as adding one line that says DNSSEC validation auto on bind, and I forget how it's done on unbound. One line to your configuration file in the options. And if you add auto, then it will just work. when the roll happens. So I encourage people who've been thinking about this, adding DNSSEC validation and think, well, maybe it's a little bit difficult. Well, actually it's not. The difficult part is testing it and making sure that you don't have a broken firewall or something. But the implementing it, super, super easy. Thank you.
May I comment? You're absolutely true, but some experts and advisors to ICANN think different way. That maybe they know more.
I think the
Dmitry Burkov also TCRs from West Coast.
okay, Dima is a TCR from the West Coast. The East Coast and the West Coast are disagreeing. It's usual. Okay, the point of this talk is simple. Don't rely on everything to be done automatically. We are notifying, ICANN is notifying you that there's going to be a change, there's going to be a rollover. Maybe your software does it automatically, maybe it supports RFC 5011, but it's good for you to go and check. Please check, you have 1 year notice to go and check this stuff, see what are the problems, check your firewalls, restrictions on DNS packet size and stuff like this. And you know the date, it's October 11, 2017. You know that there's going to be a change. Don't take a vacation on that date. Thank you. Have a nice stay in Mauritius.
Thank you. And if you want more information, again, seize the coffee break, lunch to network and peer with all the panelists and among yourself. So up next, I'm going to call Amrish and August.
Scream. Hello. Ah, it's working. I don't need to scream. So, yeah. Now that SM has scared you about your DNSSEC validation going to break next year, I'm going to scare you even more about some very bad connectivity in Africa, or maybe some good connectivity in Africa. We don't know. Let's see. So this is a piece of work that we have done collaboratively with LACNIC, with actually Augustine, who is my colleague sitting over there. The idea was actually to see how countries in Africa can be clustered together in terms of latencies. So the idea was actually to see how countries are close to each other, not on a traditional geographical basis, but now, since we are all in the information age, we want faster internet, we want interconnected countries and regions, etc. So how countries in Africa are actually close to each other, especially that we are spending so much effort and money in deploying infrastructure like IXPs, etc. I'm sure you must have heard about the Axis project from the African Union and ISOC. So the idea was to understand, for example, here we are in Mauritius, what is the latency in Mauritius from one ISP to another. We also wanted to have a good overview of what is the state of connectivity in Africa, as I said, in between countries, but also in a sub-region of Africa, but also globally, actually, yeah, between all the 54 or 57 different economies that we are actually managing. Then Augustine will give you a brief comparison between Africa and the Latin American region based on the same methodology on which we actually did this study. So to collect the data, as you must have guessed, it's an internet measurement project, we have actually collected data from different vantage points. We of course had different choices. For example, we could have used the RIPE Atlas, which is fairly distributed in Africa. Unfortunately, not as much as I would have hoped. So we are actually distributing probes. I have a handful of 20 probes with me. So if you guys are interested to host a probe that will actually contribute to the RIPE Atlas vantage points and help us gather much more accurate data, so you're welcome to come and talk to me after this presentation at the coffee break. So instead of RIPE Atlas, what we use is a fairly new platform called the Speed Checker. Why we use this platform? It's because was actually offering us much more vantage points, 850 probes as opposed to 250 probes for RIPE Atlas. So the study actually covered almost 300 unique AS numbers in Africa, which is quite a good number, because if we divide it by the number of countries, it's roughly about 6 AS numbers per country, which we think was quite enough for this study. So how it works is that those probes were actually targeting UCLA speed test servers. You all know about UCLA when you try to do bandwidth testing from your home to see how good is your bandwidth. So those UCLA servers are also installed at the different ISPs spread over Africa, and the probes which are also installed at the ISPs will target them and do the measurements. So to get latency, a very simple way is to run ICMP pings. Unfortunately, this study doesn't allow us to do, this platform doesn't allow us to do ICMP pings over IPv6, so we had to do it over IPv4, but yet it is still interesting to see what is the state of the internet in IPv4. So this study was done over a period of 56 days, almost 2 months, and we collected more than 121 measurements data points. If we look at the latency in Mauritius, so how close is Mauritius to the other regions of Africa? We can see that we could have expected that Southern Africa is closest to Mauritius because there are multiple reasons. Could be that we have good physical connectivity to them. It can also mean that we have good business relationship with other ISPs in this region. And it can also be expected that Mauritius is quite far from Central Africa, where the latency is quite high. But what is interesting to see here is that Mauritius seems closer to Northern Africa rather than Eastern Africa. But from a geographical point of view, Mauritius is obviously closer to Eastern Africa. So what are the reasons behind this? The reasons could be multiple. We obviously have to dig more into what are the actual reasons. As I said, it could be logical topology or physical topology. But one thing we can actually say that Northern Africa is also close to Europe, and we know that most of the African countries have also good connection to Europe because of historical ties, or this is the way you were doing it before, etc., etc. So the closer you are to Europe, the closer actually you are also to the other countries in Africa. So who are the nearest neighbors of Mauritius? Mauritius is itself close to itself, of course, meaning that probably the IXP is doing some good job over here. We also found that Mauritius is interestingly close to Burundi. We couldn't figure why, but yesterday we tried to do some more pings with Burundi, and actually the connection was quite good. We got the minimum latency was actually 66 milliseconds to Burundi. And the furthest is Mozambique, Uganda, and those countries are in the Eastern Bloc of Africa. So in terms of in-country latency, we chose to list the top 3. Zimbabwe, Gabon, and Mauritius are in the top 3. And unfortunately, the top loss are Cameroon, Sierra Leone, and Congo DRC. All of them have IXPs. Some of them have probably operational IXPs, and some of them are actually being set up. I think in Cameroon, actually I'm sure in Cameroon they have plans of setting up with the ANTIC, who is the regulator, but probably they have not yet, they are not yet operating it. Maybe people in the room, if they have more information, can actually enlighten us on that. But the good news is that 14% of all countries in Africa have are above 100 milliseconds. That's good, but there is still room for improvement. And 47% are under the threshold of 50%, which is very good actually. So we did the in-country latency data collection. Now we see how far are countries to the rest of Africa. As we can see over here, sorry. As you can see over here, the latency in Northern America is the smallest as compared to Central America. As I said before, Northern Africa, is close to Europe, and the fact that you are close to Europe, all other countries, as we know, have good ties with Europe, and that's why Northern Africa is actually closer to any other places in the continent. So I will let my colleague Augustine talk about the clusters and how actually the methodology of how we actually clustered the countries based on the latency. And he will also give you some information about what is the situation in Latin America. Thank you.
Thanks, Amrish. So we were sitting in this pile of measurements that were originated in many countries. They had many countries as their destination. And we asked ourselves, what could we do to find any hidden patterns, things that we couldn't see in plain sight? So we thought, okay, this type of data, it's very suitable to build a graph that having many nodes and many edges connecting the graph, where the nodes would be countries and the edges would be the latency values we have measured so far. So we built a graph, and we thought, well, what's the best strategy to find these hidden patterns? So what we did was choosing an algorithm that will help us find these relationships. It's the kind of algorithm that is used in social networking, like Facebook, where your nodes are people and your edges are friendships or relationships. And you get to explore these communities behind our plain data. What we would get as a result is what we call the clusters. It's just the group of nodes or groups of countries that are better connected between them than to the rest of the region. Let's say groups of countries which are very close together. So when we applied this algorithm in our Africa graph, we put everything on a map, and this is how it showed like. At the beginning, we saw it was they had a very strong geographical component, which was predictable, as close countries tend to have good connectivity between them. But we started to ask further questions, some examples of countries that are surrounded by another cluster, let's say another community. For example, Niger or Madagascar, they belong to one cluster, but they are actually surrounded by countries who belong to another cluster. We couldn't get the the root cause for each case, which led to a country to be in that cluster. But the good thing is that by clustering all this data, we could pinpoint these cases that were not predictable at all. They're not anomalies, but they're, yes, probably some subject of study in the future. We'd love like people, network operators, or people who have knowledge about the underlying topologies, the underlying submarine cables or satellite links, people who know how business is done in those countries, which networks is your traffic going to, all that kind of local information we'd love to have feedback about, because we can't go into every situation. One more thing we started thinking about is if there's a cultural component driving the clusters, because language might be a common ground for certain operators to build their relationships, but it also might be a barrier. So we have a kind of open question is this kind of splitting Africa in different clusters or not. So the result we got is it has a lot of inputs from the geography, the networks, the cables, and the people. And as Samrish told you a while ago, we did this study in Latin America as well. So we thought about putting both results together and to see if there was something in common, get to explore and fiddle a bit about with the data. So they have some things in common. Well, the both outcomes show that 4 clusters for region. 3 of the clusters are very well defined in both cases, and there's also a not as well defined cluster for in each case. And there's also this, as I told you, how submarine cables might be driving the clustering. In Latin America, for example, you have lots of Atlantic cables and some Pacific cables. It might be the same case in Africa with the southeastern cluster and probably the northern cluster. So, in terms of latency, we put both maps with the same color scale, and despite the big difference, Africa has more latency, but also has many more countries, which makes, and they're bigger countries. You see how South America has lots of countries concentrated in the Caribbean, which, if you get to think about it, countries are much nearer between them than in Africa. Also, if you consider that the study covers 57 countries, that's a lot of combinations to go from one country to another one, which are much less in Latin America. So, a little bit to start wrapping up, connecting with what Amrish said at the beginning, Mauritius looks to have a very good in-country latency, but as you start doing things outside of the island, the performance starts to downgrade quite considerably. And then the cluster analysis we could do just could give us some insight that there are 4 regions. There's one small cluster with Benin and Togo, and there's another one which is not very well defined. But we can see that there's a lot of room for improvement. The good thing is the data is here. The data is here. We'd love to have feedback from people knowing specific things from a certain country, those things that we cannot get, that we just don't know. So we still have some work to do. let's say this was like a snapshot of the region in these 2 months, but we'd love to cross this data with things like infrastructure, specifically the submarine cables and the satellite links, with relationships between networks and the presence or not of IXPs in the African region. I think this is a very good thing to see how the investment in the region gets seen from our latency measurements. We hope this map gets much lighter as traffic is kept local instead of going to Europe and going back to Africa. Some final notes. We've been running this for 2 months, getting 101,000 measurements. Everything is available, publicly available. We've used Mozilla and MaxMind for geolocation, and we use the speed checker platform to do our ICMP pings. And that's all. If you have any questions, please stand to a microphone or have a chat with us in the corridor. We'll be around. Thank you.
Padma from Huawei. This is very interesting. I do have a question. I'm guessing you're curious and you're trying to do a trace route on some of those to find out. So I'm curious to know, is it hop by hop latency? Is it spread, or do you feel that there are some special, almost single point of failure which is influencing the whole trace route latency?
Okay. The question is are all these pings going through a central point?
Yeah, what I want to know is it spread all over. Let's say you had 10 hops, and each 10 hop actually took 12 milliseconds, so by the time it's 120. Or is it some of them particularly are taking more time? Did you have any?
We haven't done a hop by hop analysis.
Yeah, you didn't do any trace routes because you could have seen.
We'd love to do it, but we can't give an answer right now.
Yeah, because that's why I was wondering whether you had a look at it or not. Not yet, maybe. Okay.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's really cool. So that comment just spurred one thought. The stats you were showing per country, I guess, were like the averages of the results you were taking at those points. I can imagine.
The map.
So from a given vantage point to another vantage point, did you see much diversity? Was there much variance in those samples? And maybe to answer this question, you could actually look at covariance between different vantage points to see if actually you see sudden spikes in delay at the same time for two perhaps different countries. And that might reveal that somewhere there's a tendency to maybe an IXP or a route that they're both.
Something we've done is not compare different vantage points in a time series, but get a histogram. So what we see is there's usually more than one mode in the histogram. So if you get 200 milliseconds, it's not 200 straight. It's like one is a little bit under and one is a little bit above. That might be related with asymmetrical traffic or stuff like that. But yes, we can have an in-depth study of how different vantage points behave in time.
Cool. Let's perhaps
Great.
talk later. Great talk.
We can also eventually share the paper we have written on this once it's accepted or rejected, I hope not, by the Passive and Active Measurement Conference.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are a little bit ahead on the agenda. We can break for coffee so that we can take 10 minutes more on coffee time. And then you'll be back at 4 sharp in the room. Thank you. So, welcome back everyone. Achille, Bryce, can you have the people from the coffee break area to come in? Thank you. So I will now call Mukam Tamon, the head of capacity building of AFRINIC, the CEO of AFRINIC, Alan Barrett, and the CEO of ATI, Jawi Fairfawi, to get on stage. So, wait.
Welcome back, everyone. So, what do exams and democracy have in common? What do examinations and democracy have in common? Counting the results, and you know how that might end up. Or to borrow from the popular quote about democracy, it is the worst form of government except all the other ones that have been tested. Well, it's a similar thing when it comes to exams. It's the worst form of testing people's knowledge or skills in a scalable manner, except all the other forms that have been tried before. So I'm here to talk about our certification platform called 36 and the partnership model for it. So 2009 to 2014, my team and I, we've been to almost every single country on this continent. If we haven't been there, it's because they've got bigger problems than internet and IPv6. Now, during each one of these workshops, and at the end of the workshop, someone will come up and ask, Mukam, are you going to award us a certificate? Is AFRINIC going to award us a certificate? And I'd think, in that moment, I'll put on my joker persona. And I would say, you want us to give you a certificate for sitting through a 3-day workshop? So I'll take a deep breath, self-control, Tamon, you're speaking on behalf of the company, so you have to be nice. And then I'll say something like, not going to happen. But internally, I'll say something a lot less nice than this. Not going to happen. But then be careful. For all the words that you utter, you might be forced to eat them at some point in the future. Come 2015, if there's one thing that our team prides itself on doing consistently is that we rigorously collect feedback from all the people that we train. And we read each and every one of this feedback. We analyze it. And there's this ridiculous idea that you have to listen to what your customers are saying, right? And what they were saying was, it is important for us to have what? Some kind of certificate after we do trainings. Therefore, we were forced to eat our words of certificates from AFRINIC, not going to happen. Because at that moment, we realized that we were looking at it from a very puritanical and sometimes naive perspective that everyone is in it just for the love of learning. But here was evidence telling us that for some people, that piece of paper that shows that they've gone some training matters. for career development, for whatever the reason is, it does matter to them. And therefore, the crew sat down and said, okay, this doesn't have to be a game of they win and we lose, because one of the things that has always concerned us is that we do not want to put an AFRINIC seal of approval on a document that someone will pass off. And if their competence or their knowledge is found wanting, they blame AFRINIC for it. But it didn't have to be that way. Could we find something that would give each of the participants value for their knowledge while still giving AFRINIC value, while not ruining our reputation, while elevating our status in the community? And we said, yes, there was. We could. And 36 was our answer to that. 36 by AFRINIC is our IPv6 certification platform under the banner of the IPv6 Forum. We are one of only 12 organizations in the world who are certified at the gold level by the IPv6 Forum. Now, there are 3 levels to this certification. The first one is silver level for engineers. After you write the silver level, you can get the gold level as a network engineer, as a systems engineer, or as a security engineer. And after you get the gold level, you can proceed to be certified as a trainer. Now, the requirements for these certifications were decided and agreed upon by the IPv6 Forum, a consortium of vendors and big other players in the industry. And so we've just implemented a mechanism to do this scalably. And so those are the 3 levels. So currently, we can deliver certifications for the silver level and the gold level. And there's a reason we haven't gone all through. The hard work of putting together a platform, putting together processes to tie all of that together is already in place. But we also love the lean startup methodology. We want to build a minimum viable product. Because even though we like to believe that we are cool and smart, it's quite possible that we might fail. So we have a minimum viable product, and then we take it to the market and see how does it perform before we put in a lot more resources to developing the others. Now, I'm going to walk you on one page what this is all about. This is the model of how AFRINIC certifications are supposed to work. So we've got the first value proposition, a certification exam that we deliver to engineers through 2 channels, online and at conferences. And the benefit we get from this value proposition is that we could get some exam fees that could help us offset the cost of the free training that we provide all over the continent, but it also provides quality control, which was our first concern. So, the questions in the test bank were developed consistent with Bloom's model of taxonomy of questions, so that if you could pass this, there's a good chance that you understand the concepts and the knowledge that make up this body of skills. Now, by the end of 2015, we were ready to take this to the market. And thanks to our friends in the IT department, we had a payment module. And by the end of 2015, we had gotten interest, even without advertisement, from every single planet. So, no, not planet. That's being too ambitious. From every single continent who wanted to take this. But then we stopped. Let's think through this. We did not want this to be something so expensive like the Cisco, the Juniper model, where you have to go to the VUEs because that was going to be. That's not why we are doing this. We simply wanted to be able to give people certificates with some confidence, not just because they sat through a 3-day class. And therefore, consistent with our vision at AFRINIC, we want to build communities and expand the pie for partners. We thought perhaps there's a second value proposition here. And that's what we came up with, the value proposition of the 36 partners, which will offer to delivery partners. And they offer one thing additionally, test centers that help boost the quality control mechanism. Because it's one thing if you sit in your room and write an exam versus if you go into a location, someone authenticates you by your ID and invigilates you as you write an exam. We are going to be much more comfortable with the later model. But also, through this, we can start building partners to expand our training offerings all across the continent. And why not the globe? So that is the second value, our second value proposition for delivery partners. They would run test centers, and on top of these test centers, they would do other things. And what was the benefit we were going to get from this? Scale and exposure. Because if we are going to do this really well, we need to be able to invigilate every single testing session. There are just 4 people in my team. Even if all of Africa were going to work, we just can't do this scalably all across the globe. And that's why we need delivery partners. They provide scale, but also exposure for us in their local communities. So it's possible that there's countries where someone might not be able to buy their voucher online, but they could go into a local office for one of our partners and get their voucher and then get their certification. That's the only thing that really matters. Every other thing is just part of the model. Those are the key resources that we need to make all of this work is what our question bank, the question engine, and our IT infrastructure. And the key activities that drive all of this essentially go to platform administration, questions administration, marketing. And any resource that we don't have ourselves, or any key activity that we cannot perform ourselves, we will depend upon partners. Partners could be ISOC chapters, NOCs, training academies, regulators. We'll see some requirements of partners later on. And of course, there's a certain cost involved with this. The cost of marketing, the cost of the IT infrastructure, or HR costs on our part, on the partner's part, to make all of this work. So that's the model of how our certification platform is going to work. So what are the benefits for a partner? The very first thing is that you can start providing quality IPv6 certification to your community, be it your country, be it your training center, be it your academy. Because I am IPv6 certified gold, and I know the pain it took me to achieve my certification. And I wanted to make that a lot easier for everyone. So this suddenly makes it, you can just go to a testing center, like everyone does every other certification. You register, pass an exam, and you get certified. But also, looking at the community perspective, if you're a network operators group, we want to be able to offer you something else that you can host at your event, your conference. Right? So what if when you have your annual conference, you host a testing event that could help attract people to your event? But also, we want to make the certification skills accessible, particularly for those countries that due to Forex restrictions cannot conduct payments online. And then most importantly, all the funds that we will raise from testing can be plowed back to support capacity building. So at AFRINIC, for example, we train anywhere from 600 to 800 engineers across 20 countries every single year. That comes from the budget, AFRINIC's budget. And so it would be good to be able to raise some money so we can do a lot more of that. So if you want to become a partner, essentially what do you need? You need seating for at least 3 test takers. A PC, you need PCs on each of these seats with at least 5 Mbps internet connection. You need an IP camera to monitor the testing session, and then an invigilator, someone who will authenticate the test taker, usher them into the test, and make sure that they're behaving themselves. So today we are going to sign our first MOU for partnerships under this platform. There are 2 more under negotiation as we speak. And hopefully, a lot more of you who are network operators groups, ISOC chapters, you run IT training academies, or institutes of telecommunications, you consider joining us. Because we believe that using our partners and this platform, we could make this, created at AFRINIC, one of the best and most popular IPv6 certification platforms in the world. So, are you going to be with us? Thank you very much.
So thank you, Mukam. If you have more questions, you can reach out to Mukam directly. I'll now call the CEO of AFRINIC, Mr. Alan Barrett, and the CEO of RTI, Jawia Perfawi, to sign the MOU.
Thank you. So, as Mukam said, this is a new program that AFRINIC has launched. We would like to be able to issue certificates to many people throughout Africa who are accomplished in IPv6. And our very first training partnership is with ATI, and we have Jawer here, the CEO of ATI. So we're signing an MOU today, which says that AFRINIC and ATI will collaborate in this IPv6 certification project. So let us have the document and some pens, please. And maybe you want to say something.
After all.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, okay. So,
Merci. Merci, Barrett. Barrett m'a demandé de donner un petit mot tout à l'heure. Je lui ai dit après. Donc, j'ai préféré qu'on...
So I preferred that AFRINIC speaks first and Yati afterwards. So first before the signature and then after the signature. So first of all, I'm very pleased to be amongst you and to be always amongst you in AFRINIC. Secondly, I'm also proud of this MOU signature for two reasons. This MOU firstly brings trust. The second thing is the intelligence. And here I'd like to seize this opportunity to thank AFRINIC for its commitment and this trust as a partner for the development of Internet and for the IPv6 transition. So thank you, Alan. Thank you, Lucam. Thank you, MBY. From Tunisia, you have all contributed to the preparation of this MOU. At the national level, it's very important to sign this important convention. Why? It's that this MOU is very much interesting, as you all know already. NATI has always been considered and is still considered in Tunisia as a precursor. It is an engine for internet development in my country. It is an engine for growth, for development, because at the very start it was an IXP. Since 1995, it was the engine for the development of internet, whilst being the first internet service provider and also the first provider of internet in Tunisia on the whole. We were also an engine when we segmented the internet market in Tunisia. It was very intelligent at that time by specific intelligent targeting. So there has been an FSC for health sector, for education. There has been an ISP for education, for scientific research, another one for university. And for the private sector, we have not forgotten them. We've also segmented this market, and we've got ISPs also for the households, for the business sector as well. And this is what led to the internet penetration in Tunisia. And obviously, this was due to ATI. So we were the precursors. And we also had the first STMA. You know what is an STMA? It is 155 megabytes per second, and it was very, very important. And STMA was extraordinary. We have had the first 100 mega port, and then 1 giga, and then the first port for 1 giga compared to other operators. So we had all the operators, and we got all the operators, and the whole of those people who work in internet, we got them to be on the same level for internet. And we have also got the 100 giga for international. So we are always trying to be the ones leading. We obviously, and we cannot prevent ourselves from being the leaders in this field. So we cannot not be a development organ for the IPv6 transition. It's true that it's not always easy to be a precursor. It demands a lot of work, but I think that it is necessary that we maintain ourselves. So this is something which is very difficult to be a forerunner, but it's this initiative, this MOU comes today at the right time. It is a trendsetter, I would say, a forerunner, and also in the neighboring countries, this will ensure an intelligent transition, a smooth transition. And I said at the start of my speech that it is important for building trust. Now, the intelligence, that's you. The intelligence is in the fact that training people with a certification, this would bring in much more trust. And once we have had this training, the certification and the trust, it would be like we would have developed a network of ambassadors inside the businesses, and then we would have the actors within internet and telecoms to be able to defend the transition towards IPv6. It would be as if we're going to be developing together this network of ambassadors who would be ensuring the transition from inside, and this is what needs to be done on top of the regulatory frameworks, etc. So this transition towards IPv6 goes through training and certification and trust. Thank you for your attention.
Trust. As you know, and as maybe Mokam has mentioned, AFRINIC is one of the 12 organizations in the world certified by the IPv6 Forum to directly certify engineers under its 36 program. We have this capacity building program that is free of charge to network engineers. And when we talk about deployment of V6, there is always this financial constraint to move to V6, but there's also this capacity building that is lacking in Africa. So we are opening our call for hosting for the capacity building training free of charge next year. So if you want to host a training and train your engineers in your country, you just come to AFRINIC, or you talk to the capacity building program, or to any staff of AFRINIC. So thank you again, ATI, for your trust, and we look forward for more cooperation with organizations and countries. So we'll continue on our agenda. Up next, I'll call Yann and Alain Durand. If you can come on stage, please. So we have only 2 more presentations before the opening cocktail of tonight. So Yann is going to talk about the NAT64, DNS64 experiment from Geo6 Lab. And Alain Durand from ICANN is going to just give us a presentation. Are we there yet? IPv6 as related to the GDP per capita. So we are going to take questions after the presentations. Is that okay? I'll ask you to come here so that with the live stream we don't have any issue. Thank you. So that would be Alain first.
Thank you and merci à toute l'équipe d'AFRINIC pour me recevoir.
Thank you to all the AFRINIC team for this presentation.
Presentation slides are in English. It would be a little weird for me to speak in French with my slides in English. Thank you. My name is Alain Durand. I work for ICANN in the office of the CTO in the research group, and we're trying to do a bunch of research activities. And one of the things that I've been looking at this year is the deployment of IPv6 around the world. So, yeah, it is. So for this particular study, we started with a set of questions. First question was, where are we now with IPv6? I started to work on IPv6 in 1993, which is too old that I really care to admit. And since then, essentially, people have been asking me, when will IPv6 be there? And the answer was, well, in 2 years from now. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that we still have the same answer today. So we have seen some good news on IPv6 in the press, some companies, large companies, making headlines on this. But is this deployed uniformly around the world, or is this only done in pockets? And is there a divide? Are we going into the next digital divide with the story, with some countries staying in IPv4 and some countries moving toward IPv6? Those are the driving questions that I had leading into this. And the next set is, okay, are we going to be there yet? That is, can we retire IPv4? Because today when people deploy IPv6, there's always an IPv4 story in the back. Could be a dual stack deployment, could be v6 and a translation to v4, but there's always a v4 aspect to it. So as long as there's a v4 aspect to any IPv6 deployment, people can wonder why even doing this v6 stuff, right? It only makes sense if at the end of the day, we can retire IPv4. And are we there yet, or is it going to take a year, 5 years, 10 years? We don't know. So those are the questions that we wanted to answer. Methodology. I believe for any scientific study, we need to publish a methodology, explain how we're going to get there. If not, you just have random numbers that don't necessarily mean anything. So first, we're going to find some data, and I will talk more about what data we are finding. And we are going to compare countries. So the way economists do compare countries is using a metric called the GDP per capita, gross domestic product per capita. Not just a pure domestic product, because when you have countries that are really big or countries that are very small, it doesn't really help to compare them. We will look at outliers. Sometimes it's more interesting to look at surprises that we find in the data rather than run-of-the-mill results. So we're going to look at that. And then we will assess the data. As I mentioned, we will have a couple sources for the data that tell somehow a different story. What can we tell about this? All right, so finding data. There are a lot of IPv6 related data in the world, but it's really hard to compare them. For this particular study, we found two sets that were useful to us. One was a study made in AFRINIC by Jeff Houston, and one was data coming from Akamai. So Jeff used a network based on Google Ads that he distributes all around the world, and relies essentially on people clicking on something. And he offers them IPv4 resources and IPv6 resources, and he counts how many people are actually going to the IPv6 addresses. So what he really measures there is penetration. Can people use this IPv6 resource or not? Akamai measures it on their caches. It means that somebody is requesting some data, goes to the cache, and comes back. It means there's a real transfer. So what we are measuring here is what I would say a proxy, meaning a figure that can be used to represent the actual value, a proxy for traffic or bandwidth. So one is capability to use, and the other one is actual usage. So those are two very different notions. So let's look at the data. First thing I did was to take the list of countries and rank them by GDP per capita. So I used the data from the World Bank, which I thought was a reasonable source. So they are on the x-axis. So it's a little bit difficult to read the names, but the slides are on the website and you can look at all the different names. And the green line here is the actual GDP per capita according to the World Bank. On this graph, I'm going to superimpose the data that I got from Jeff and from Akamai. So you will see blue and red. It's hard to see in this particular graph. We will see later the difference between the two. But essentially the spikes mean there is some IPv6 happening there. So if you look at, is there a pointer here? Yeah. If you look like this, we are above 50%. There's at least one country that has IPv6 being at 50%. It's quite amazing. Also have a number of countries over here. Well, it's not that stellar. So let's look into more to this. Let's try to group those countries together. So I don't have like fancy algorithm to do that. I'm just going to rely on my eyes, okay? So essentially what we have is, if we are in this group over there, it will appear that you are more likely to have IPv6 available. If you're in the group to the right, much less likely, okay? So that group to the left are the top 50 countries ranked in GDP per capita. The cutoff is at $23,000. So that seems to indicate that approximately there is this divide between countries where you have more than $23,000 per capita and the others. Not quite that simple. Let's see. That. Right. Let's zoom in into the top left of the graph. So this is the same thing, just zoomed in. What we see, this is not equally distributed. We have 6 countries in this group that are leading the charge. They are Switzerland, the US, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and Greece. What is more interesting to me is the countries that are not leading the charge. Countries that usually are the typical, usual suspect in network deployment, that are not in this graph. But if you look at the top 10 countries in the world, not just in the top 50 economies in the world, you will see that there are some other countries like Ecuador and Peru who are in the top IPv6 players. And even if we think about countries like Portugal and Greece, those are not the typical suspects that you'll expect will deploy new technologies, right? But you can compare, for example, Portugal and Italy. Italy is, where's my graph? Here it is. Not much. So it's not that Italy is not doing something right? It's that those are two economies that are somehow comparable, and they have done very different choices. And again, we have some economies that are not in the top 50 economies, but that are doing quite a lot in IPv6. So, let's click here. Oh, what? So, what is it? Oops. I'm going back. Yeah. If you now look at the right-hand side of my diagram, like countries that are not in the top 50, we see some interesting cases. Like Romania, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, Bosnia, Bolivia, Kiribati, Haiti. Now, those two on the right-hand side are measurement errors. I put them on the graph to illustrate the point. When we do this, we use geolocalization data. And we all know that geolocalization data is not exactly reliable in IPv4. In IPv6, it's even less reliable. Okay? So when you have a large country with a large population, those errors are, yeah, that's okay, they are in the noise. But when you have a small countries like Kiribati or Haiti, a small error can completely skew the data. So we made some measurement again a few months later, and we realized that this doesn't exist. Okay? But this does. Like, and we tried to have some discussion in the last Hive meeting to figure out what's the driver between some of the success stories. Like Bosnia, the case was made, I'm not sure if it is right or not, the case was made at the meeting that because of the war, they had to rebuild the infrastructure. And by rebuilding the infrastructure, they had access to new equipment that had IPv6. So the barrier for them to turn IPv6 on was fairly low. In other countries that will have a similar GDP per capita, but have older type of equipment, deploying IPv6 is a much harder proposition. So that would seem to indicate that simply looking at GDP per capita is not a good enough indicator, but looking at the infrastructure in place, looking at the age of the equipment, looking at the skills that are available, looking at all the different interconnections that are available in that particular country is probably a better indicator. So, we talk about this. Now let's look at this data and try to assess the quality of the data that I have. So remember, I have two sources, right? In blue, this is the data from Akamai that's a proxy for the bandwidth being used. In red, that's the data from Jeff Houston that's a proxy for capability of using IPv6. You see that those two data don't match. They're different. Okay. So if they don't match, maybe what we can do is to plot the ratio of the two of them and see what happened, which is what I did. So this is the ratio of penetration of a bandwidth, which is essentially the ratio of capability versus usage. So when you are on the left here, it means that you have a capability, but you are not using it much. When you're on the right, it means that there's not much capability, but whatever you have, you are really using a lot. That's what it means. So I've done that for all the countries that have at least 0.1% penetration in Jeff data. So it's not all the countries here. So intuitively, you will expect that the two numbers are the same. If you're capable of using it, you're going to use it, right? So you will say, 1 should be the normal result. That's clearly not the case. What do we have? Let's look at the left. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 countries that are way over 10 in this ratio, and I've found a number of them that are anywhere between 15 times and 900 times. Those are countries where IPv6 is available but not used. Don't know why. Again, there might be some geolocalization issues. We'll have to dig into that. But there are countries that are not so small, like Great Britain. The ratio is 7. This is not a place where you say geolocalization is a bit of an issue. It's a fairly developed country, fairly high in the stats, but they use IPv6 7 times less than they have it available. Don't know why. Oops. So, to the right-hand side was our outliers. Those are the countries that are using IPv6 a lot, even though the suggestion is it's not deployed much. And you find countries like Korea, Austria, and honestly, I'm not sure why. One possible explanation is that this data is collected from Akamai, meaning that it's a place where caches are being used. So depending if you have local content versus remote content in your traffic matrix in the country, that may skew this data a little bit. That's a possible explanation, not 100% sure. But removing the outliers, now we have 2 other blocks. A bunch of countries for which the usage is between 2 and 8 times less than the penetration, and a bunch of countries where it's 1 to 2 times less. So if you do the average of all of this, what do you get? Removing the outliers is essentially average is 2.2 and the median is 1.8, or let's say 2. Which means that anytime you look at the penetration number of IPv6, you have in your mind to say, penetration is not usage. Usage is probably half of that. But remember, this is usage measured through caches. Not all the internet traffic goes through caches. The rest of the internet traffic that doesn't go through caches goes through internet exchange points. And I don't have it on the graph here. We have started a new study to instrumentalize exchange points. And the data that we are seeing there is not very encouraging. On the Seattle exchange point, they have been measuring anywhere between 2 and 5% over the last 6 months of IPv6, which is much less than the traffic that we see measured by Akamai in the US, that's about 20%. So that's the data. Again, so are we there yet? Short answer is no. Longer answer is there are positive signs. This is not that IPv6 is dead, right? We have seen a lot of news in the press about success stories like Comcast success stories, Google success stories, Facebook success stories, and all of that. So this is happening. There are 6 countries that have more than 20%. If 15 years ago we have said, are we going to be at 20% anywhere anytime soon? People will be, yeah, not, but we are there. However, this is not the case all around the world. We still have a very large number of countries with relatively low GDP per capita that have little or no IPv6 story. And that should temper any enthusiasm. In other words, what I'm saying is, this IPv6 story is moving, it has taken off, but it's not yet a replacement for IPv4. IPv4 is going to be there with us for quite some time, and we should not simply wish it off. Thank you very much. So do you want me to take questions now? Let's start with the rear mic.
Yeah, Andrew Alston, Liquid Telecom. I went through your presentation in quite some detail online, and I've got a whole number of comments. Firstly, I don't necessarily agree at all that the GDP per capita has anything necessarily to do with the deployment of V6. Purely because I can tell you right now that one of the countries that we've seen huge successes with in IPv6 is Zimbabwe. All it took was someone with some motivation and a motivated team to get out there and do it. It took a week of intense work, and the people who did that work are in this room today, and it changed the percentage points very, very quickly. So I am not at all convinced that saying that because a country has GDP and they don't have movement today, that it is anything to do with necessarily the GDP of the country, and there is any actual correlation there. You've got a correlation that seems to exist, but that isn't actually backed by anything other than potentially you've got people who maybe they aren't informed. The equipment, quite frankly, in countries with lower GDP, is actually normally going to be newer equipment because they've got a far more recent deployment, and it should support it. If I look at the legacy equipment that I see in Europe and the States versus the equipment that I see being deployed today in Africa, I'm telling you the equipment that I see in Africa is often far, far more advanced. Why? Because you don't have green fields. If I look at, again, the GDP stuff, I look at Zimbabwe, again, as a classic example. They are running at an actual usage percentage higher than Austria, Vietnam, Singapore, New Zealand, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Poland, Guatemala, Sweden, Sri Lanka. The list goes on and on and on and on. And all it takes is motivation. And to say also that it is not a replacement for V4, there are many places where it is a replacement for V4. I can tell you in our own company, we've turned off probably 10,000 V4 points where we simply didn't need V4 because we manage entirely via V6. I also think that one of the things that hasn't been looked at, which needs to be looked at a lot more closely, is look at the rates of V6 penetration in markets where V4 ran out, and the soft landing policies applicable in those regions. The US and ARIN's region, which had a hard run out, has the highest V6 penetration in the world. RIPE had a soft landing policy, but fairly restrictive. That region has the second highest deployment. I argue that what you see with the V6 deployment is actually far more about how much V4 is left than anything to do with GDP.
So I could respond to all of your comments. I'm only going to respond to the last one. I don't think that the picture you are painting is correct. If you look at the list over here, here we go. If you look at this list over here, you will see that this is completely sparse. You find some countries that do, in the region that you mentioned, have deployed IPv6, like the US. Some of us that have not. In Europe, it's also very sparse. You will see countries like Denmark that are barely on the graph, and you see Belgium that are 50%. So they both face the same IPv4 crunch in the same region. In the Asia-Pacific region, we have very similar policy on IPv4 on the last /8. You see very little of those countries on this graph. So I've not seen through the data a correlation between the soft landing policy or hard crash, as you described, and IPv6 deployment. But I mentioned earlier in my presentation that GDP per capita is not enough. Looking, and I agree to your point, to the actual state of equipment, is it some recent equipment or older equipment, is also very, very important. But at the end of the day, what we see, regardless of the GDP per capita discussion, is on a graph like this. This is not deployed worldwide at the same rate. And that's really the bottom line of the story. Now, this is an ongoing study. Next year, I'm going to come back with a similar graph, and hopefully the picture will be brighter. And maybe the year after, it will be brighter again. At this point today, that's what we have. Dimitri.
Thank you. Dmitry Burkov, RIPE NCC. Alan, I don't want to criticize this type of metrics and set of metrics. I can agree that they can be extended. But for me, the question, for whom such research is useful? For blue chips consultants? For politicians? How is useful for us? Because the logical resume, it's we will back to 25 years ago, and we should declare it's a new digital divide. Or has something missed? For whom?
So to answer your question specifically, to whom this data, this research is interesting to, I think for the internet community at large that is discussing IPv6 and IPv4, that research is very important. To have heard voices that simply says, oh, just abandon V4, just move on to V6 and be done. What this is showing is we are not at a stage yet where such a move, such a drastic move, will be possible and recommendable. Maybe in a few years it will be, but at this point, abandoning V4 seems to be a non-starter.
Mark Alkins, another question.
Excuse me, there was somebody in the microphone over there.
Sorry, Alan, I just...
Could you just put your name on, your name, people on the remote?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Gabe Fried from Hilco Streambank, asking a question in my own personal capacity. Have you looked at how competitive the telco markets are in each of the various countries where you're looking at IPv6 penetration? It seems to me that a monopoly ISP or a non-competitive market might move more slowly, whereas a more competitive market might move more quickly. And that may be there may be a stronger indication about how competitive the market for internet access is to V6 deployment versus the per capita GDP, which seems like a revenue per user proxy.
So I use GDP per capita as the initial assumption going into this, okay? And what we have seen is that there's some correlation, but not 100% correlation. The point you are making has been made also at RIPE and at LACNIC, where I presented this also, as there are a number of secondary studies that we can do comparing the competitiveness in the country, how many ISPs are competing together, and this. Looking at what is the age of the equipment and this. Looking at what is the actual penetration of IPv4 in the country and this. So there are many subsequent studies that could be made, and if there are some grad students that will be interested into this, I would be very happy to work with them to go to the next step. Now, question on the front mic.
Sorry about that, yeah. Mark Elkins. You're measuring, okay, in order to deploy IPv6, the goal is to get an address block of IPv6, to stick it on your core, to make sure that your core services are up and running, and that you're peering and transiting with IPv6, and then to bring up your own web servers and mail servers and stuff, and then eventually give it on to your customers, your eyeballs. So it can be a long, slow process. What actually were you measuring when you're looking at this? Were you looking at the machines that ISPs were hosting, or simply whether they had IPv6,
or were you actually looking as far as eyeballs when doing this?
So we had two sources of data. So each source is independent, and I'm not directly involved in any of those two sources. What the first source of data from Jeff Houston is doing is looking at eyeballs. Looking at how eyeballs click on ads, and in those ads there is a JavaScript that runs, or HTML5 now, and that offers DNS names to resolve that can either resolve to v4 or to v6 and then establish a connection just to download a one-by-one GIF. So this is actual people, eyeballs, clicking on this and seeing if it's capable of using it. There's nothing to do with the equipment in the core of the network. The second set of measurements from Akamai is looking at their caches, like it on the cache. It means somebody or some machine is requesting data being rerouted to Akamai, and then Akamai is going to fetch your actual data or get it from local cache and serve it. So this is actual traffic that goes to some kind of an eyeball or maybe some server somewhere else. So we are not measuring how many routers have moved to v6. We are not measuring how many web servers have moved to v6, how many management stations have moved to v6. That's not what we are measuring here. We are more looking at the impact on the end user, the eyeballs. Any further question? Well, thank you very much.
Excuse me, one last question. Yeah, I see your presentation is really great.
Excuse me, may I ask your name, please?
Yeah, I'm Daniel Nangaka. Your presentation is really great, but I wanted to inquire, apart from IPv6, which other factors did you consider? Are you putting into consideration the transition of technology and the gadgets that are connecting? Because we
I'm
know
sorry,
that-
I have a real hard time to you. Could you speak closer to the microphone?
I'm saying, are you putting into consideration the other factors that are affecting GDP? Because technology is not the only factor. And we are seeing the rapid movement of population from one area to the other and so forth. And all these factors affect the GDP per capita.
So I'm not trying to see if IPv6 affect the GDP per capita. I'm looking at it the other way around. I'm looking at, is there a correlation? If you are in a country with a lot of GDP per capita, does it mean that you are going to adopt IPv6? That's in this direction that I'm doing this study, not the other one.
Then practically I see that there is an indirect correlation, because the rate of the probability transition is directly proportional to the growth of the IPv4 addresses. Because since the IPv4 addresses are getting depleted and we are getting more devices with the IoT, then automatically the IPv6, that's where it comes into play well into the market.
That's where this study shows that this is not the case. Where we have economies of similar size in similar regions, my example between Italy and Portugal, where we see in Italy there's very little, and in Portugal there's quite a lot, even though they have the same type of economical characteristics, which seems to indicate that there are some other considerations that are being taken. Maybe some operators are making technology bet. Another interesting thing that I've done is to compare this with the adoption of DNSSEC and DNSSEC validation. And we see that DNSSEC validation, if you look at the leaders, the countries that are leaders in DNSSEC validation, and you compare to the countries that are leaders in IPv6 deployment, those are not the same. As if countries or service providers within those countries are making technology bet, and they are making different choices for different technologies.
This is Christopher from Liquid Telecom. Thank you for the presentation. Now, I want to point out a few things. You first mentioned that there are questions that you had. Those are your problem statements. Now, you've again said that GDP may not be the correct tool to measure penetration of IPv6 and readiness of those countries to adopt IPv6. Now, my question is it valid now to conclude based on having used a method that is not valid? So can we go ahead and say GDP has a role to play in IPv6 deployment. Are we looking at, is that what you are looking for?
So let me try to restate my conclusion to this. If I look at this graph over here, this is obvious that if you are in the top 50 GDP per capita, you have more likelihood, you have higher likelihood of having IPv6, but if you are not. So yes, there is a correlation, but the correlation is not perfect. There are cases where you see economies of same scale that have made different choices. And there are also cases where you see economies that have a lower GDP per capita that are actually leading in IPv6. So there are outliers. But remember, if you look at the countries that have more than 10% on this graph, there are only 13 countries in the world. Only 13 countries in the world.
So maybe as part of the improvement of this research, so that it can help us answer the question that you raised earlier, we would possibly want to know what other factors apart from GDP has contributed to the deployment of IPv6, or what are the challenges, so that we list them down and then we start correlating. GDP has this percentage influence in penetration.
That will be for a second stage of research, yes. If you're interested, I will be happy to work on this with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now it's up to Jan. So you will have your, and then we'll take 4 questions after so that we don't run late for the opening cocktail. Thank you.
Hello everyone, where's the, this is the counter, how does it work? Hello everyone, my name is Jan George. I work for Internet Society and I'm from Slovenia. I'm glad that we have this great meeting here in Mauritius. So this time, this is the first time I'm giving this presentation. We made it together with Sander Stefan just for this meeting. It's a premiere, so we will still have to work on it a bit, but I hope you liked it. You will like it. So who in this room is deploying IPv6? Hands up. Okay, who of you thinks that when you run out of IPv4 addresses, you will have to use NAT64 and DNSSEC? Also, you just don't know yet. All right. Okay, so let's go to the problem statement. Let's go through all these 6 degrees of inner turbulence that we have. We know that IPv6 and IPv4 are incompatible on the wire. They're just completely incompatible. They don't talk to each other. So what do? If we want to translate between them, we need some translation tools. Mobile operators are massively switching devices to IPv6 only connectivity. There are millions of users. And don't underestimate this fact. For example, T-Mobile USA today has 50 million devices running on IPv6 only, using NAT64 for translation. So if it happens that your content, your web server is on IPv4 only, these 50 million people will be able to access your content through the translation device. Therefore, the user experience is worse. So if you're running web server, if you don't have IPv6, please deploy IPv6. So what they did, they're using 464 mechanism for Android devices, or plain NAT64 for Apple, and as a transition tool to access IPv4 content. So some people do weird stuff while adding quad A's to their DNS records. We will see later what kind of stupidity these people put in quad A's and why things break. And we have some important questions. Do content providers know how their content will be seen from such environment? So if you're providing content, do you actually know how people from IPv6 only and NAT64 will actually see what you have to offer? And the next question is, do connectivity providers know what their users' experience on IPv6 only would be? So your users, when you're providing IPv6 traffic, do you know what the user experience will be and what are possible issues? So therefore, we decided to go into the lab. Sander went into the lab, I went into my lab, and we did some experiments. All right. Okay, first of all, credits, acknowledgement, supporters. Project like this and all the massive amount of work connected to performed without great support of people and companies that we work with. First of all, Internet Society. I work for Internet Society. I'm saying thank you to Internet Society to dedicating lots of my working time to do these things in the lab, and also to enable me to go around the world, talk to operators, see what the issues are, isolate the issue, and work on the solution and the help. Then for Go6 Institute, I'm still the CEO of that institute for funding and running Go6 Lab, where this all happened. Then, of course, Sander Stefan's company to provide his time and efforts, and also to Corinne Pritchard, Stefan's significant other, for a lovely design of a tool front ends, and we will talk about the tool at the end. Hugs to Corinne, if you're watching. All right. So, first of all, if you want to test Net64, so if you're looking into this, I want to understand how Net64 DNS64 works and what are the features. We put up a public DNS 64 Net64 test bed in Go6 Lab. We used it in the past also in AFRINIC environment for some testing, but now we are disclosing the full details of it. So we have 4 different implementations in the lab, 4 different instructions how to direct traffic there, and it's used by operators. Lots of operators around the world is now using this remote test lab, and also application providers are using this remote test lab to test their applications if they work through Net64. It's also used by hardware and software vendors because they're testing their solutions against multiple NAT64 vendors. For example, Google, our friends from Google, Lorenzo and Eric, at the end sent me an email saying, Jan, thank you for having these NAT64 open implementations in your lab, because while we were building and troubleshooting the 464XLET mechanism in Android, we actually used your implementations to test against and found bugs and fixed them. So this is happening. Yeah. So here in the bottom, there are instructions how to remotely access the Net64 translation mechanism if you want to use it. And here are the screenshots of what is written on the page. Here is explained what it is and how you set up your DNS resolver. And also, as you see, we have A10 networks, Net64 implementation. We have Palo Alto Networks Firewall, Net64 implementation. We have YOL. This one is free. It's a Linux kernel module that you can build. And I have a Cisco ASR1K in the lab that is just running Net64 translation. And for example, if you want to test A10, you just set your resolving DNS to this IP address. So if you want to test it now from this network, you just change your recursive DNS record to this one. You will start using my DNS64 DNS server that is providing publicly routable Net64 prefix and synthetized quad A, and you will start sending packets over IPv6 up to Slovenia, where they will be translated and sent over to the rest of the internet. So you can test this from whenever in the world you are. It's just enough that you have IPv6. This is the physical part of it. We call it the systematic chaos. That's also the name of a song from Dream Theater. This is a systematic chaos. These are Palo Alto boxes. This is an ASR1K, and this is all up and running if you want to test it, do it. All right. So at these setups, we are protecting you from bad experience on purpose. And let's see what is the enemy inside that we are protecting you from. So if you go to this URL, this is from Dan Wink. He is doing some testing of top 1 million domains. And when he gets quad A, he tries to understand what it is. And what we see in there are, can you imagine when you get a quad A with column inside? Or column 1? Or column FFF column and IPv4 address? And 64 FF9B, that's a well-known NAT64 prefix, or 2001 DB8, that is the documentation prefix. If you get any of these addresses in quad A, by default, DNSSEC server will not synthesize the quad A from the IPv4 record, but it will leave the quad A record as it is. And guess what? If you have column 1 in the quad A record, you will access your own web server if it's running on your local machine. And things like this. So these are things that are currently broken, and we see a lot of that. So, for example, another confusion it's all about breaking all illusions. It's with or without www. So here you see firstinsight.com, www.firstinsight.com has their own DNS records, but if you go if you try to ask for DNS for firstinsight.com without www, you have firstinsight.com has IPv6 address of column. Thank you for all the flowers. It will not work. Just, it will not work. Can you please fix it? Okay, so when you're deploying this in real life, you need fixes. So what can we do about it? I will not be finished in 10 minutes, don't worry. We can figure out who these people are, contact them and tell them to actually fix the issue. Remember, if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. But we don't have time and resources to actually go and ask all this and contact all these people. So we figured out there are exclude rules in DNSSEC for configuration. So in my thinking is that IANA allocated 2000:3 as global unicast address pool. So whatever else is used in quad A is by default bogus. We should not use it. Therefore, this is, for example, this is the example of the DNS64 configuration that I'm using in Go6 Lab at all 4 DNS64 servers. And as you can see here, oops, sorry. If I get on a record with RFC 1918, I just ignore it. And this one is very important. I'm actually excluding everything that is below 2000/3 and above, plus the documentation prefix. And this includes all these possible things that people put in as a quad A record. And therefore, this will be ignored, and my DNS64 record will actually synthesize a quad A record from the IPv4 record, from the A record, and add a NET64 prefix. Explanation of exclude is here. Let me go further. And now let's look into the moment of betrayal. Why do we have to say break DNSSEC yes? I'm a big proponent of DNSSEC. I want DNSSEC to be everywhere, everybody to validate and everybody to sign their zones. I have numerous speeches on how to enable DNSSEC. But in this case, if you synthesize quad A records, you cannot sign it. Therefore, if you don't put this break DNSSEC yes sentence in your config, your DNS64 will not synthesize quad A's for domains that are signed. It is what it is currently, and I hope we will get rid of DNS64 as soon as possible when people deploy IPv6 and get rid of IPv4. But currently, it's a moment of betrayal, and I hope it will not last long. Okay, so few examples of what we see. Oops, is firewalls.com. It should be secure. Still waiting for the timeout. You see, here it's NAT64. How do we see it from NAT64? Oops, still waiting for that timeout. Indeed, very secure. Timeout is very long. Right? And it's very secure. It's running on column, FFF column, and IPv4 address. Of course we cannot access it. Of course it will time out. Next one, from Spain. IPv4 server works on IPv6 and NAT64. It says that content is in preparation here, not very helpful. Shrani.si, that's the sort of like server from Slovenia where you can put files on. It's different, as you see. If you come here, it's different than if you go over IPv4, and this is a problem because some things. Oh no, this is a geolocation. So here it says that actually pictures can be uploaded just for people from Slovenia. So this is geolocated, and on IPv6, geolocation is a problem. Fix it. Okay, this one is uc.cn, no quad A, but server is still confused. What happened here, we have no idea, but they will have to fix it probably. Then we have people from .de. Do you see the obvious difference? Pictures are on IPv4 only, or they have IPv4 addresses built in or something like this. It doesn't work properly. People from NAT6, people from IPv6 will see it like this. Fix it. We have lots of examples how, for example, from IPv6 things are broken. Why? Because they didn't do it right. So how to test for all these things? Actually, Sander and I were contemplating, because this is becoming a problem, and we want a test on NAT64, we want to test on IPv6 only, we want to all resources, to make sure that all resources load okay, and we want to see if it does look good to the user, if it does look the same, or do we see any path MTU issues. So we built a tool that is online, that is free to use for everyone, and I invite you to use it. Currently it's running test on 78,000 Slovenian domains, but you can put your test in and it will go in the middle. It's called NAT64 check. Okay, this is the first page. So if you go to this address, nat64check.go6lab.si, it will bring you here. These are the few past tests that has been done, and here if you put in your URL, you can see how this will all work. I will explain the mechanics behind later. So here you have, for example, the humida.si. On NAT64, it's 100%. On IPv6 only, there is no IPv6 on this website. And here we have search and filters. So, for example, this one, I pressed IPv6 and I pressed good. That means I'm interested in IPv6 results that can be poor, mediocre, or good. And it showed, for example, the websites that have good IPv6 only result. And you can go in here and see more stuff. No, I need to finish. Okay, for example here, it's from Japan. What is the difference here? So this is where you go into the measurement result. And if you put your mouse over this picture of NAT64, it will show you that this is the difference. So you can go with mouse over and see what is the difference. Yeah, it's a shattered fortress, and it's the mirror at the same time. So we don't fix brokenness here. Here, at this tool, we don't exclude bogus quad A's. We don't cross the line in the sand, right? And for NAT6 check tool, actually, these people causing problems need to find out the situation and fix it. If we mask their situation, then they will never find it out. So how does this work? Very quickly, 4 servers. We are using Phantom.js as a command line browser. We keep track of loaded or not resources. We make screenshot of what the page has loaded. We compare images with each other, and we check for resources that could not be loaded. So this is the master server that is communicating with 3 different servers. One is IPv4 only, IPv6 only, IPv6 only plus DNSSEC NAT64. And we are fetching the content from these 3 servers and compare everything here and deliver the result. It's a little bit complex, but Sander had to program it, not us. So for example, and here you enter the domain and you request the measurement. Please take the time. This process takes some half of the minute because we need to send the command to all the servers, fetch all the content, calculate it together, compare, and then present it as a result. Take the time. Don't press the back button. It will not help at all. So test your website. Make sure that all the images analytics scripts load over IPv6. If you don't have IPv6 on your server, did you hardcore IPv4 addresses maybe? Or, you know, here is the list of issues that you can run into. And then if things fail, make sure you are persistent enough to find the issues. Test again, rinse and repeat. Let's lift this shadow of a dream. So conclusions, suggestions, questions. If you're a content provider, test how people sees your content. If you're a connectivity provider, test how IPv6 only people, users see your content. If both, all of the above. You might be surprised. Well, you probably will be surprised. And with this, here are the, oops, there were the links. There. Are there any questions? Do you think this is useful? This is, if this can be of any use?
Jan, this is Alain Durand from ICANN. 2 points. First one, IANA did not allocate 2000:/3. First off, there's no such thing as IANA. There's PTI now. But the allocation was actually made by the ITF, not by the
Okay,
IANA.
I will fix the slide. So, thank you.
So that's the first point. The second one is, I'm a little concerned by your recommendation to filter out anything that's outside of 2000/3. Whenever people put constraints in software like this hard-coded, these things, that creates problem in the future. When IETF will decide to open up another block for whatever usage, then those filters may or may not be updated. We have seen that times and times and times again, that software doesn't disappear, code doesn't get removed, things don't get updated. So anytime you add filters like this, that sounds valuable by now, and you hard code those values, that creates problems down the line. So I would strongly suggest to not do that, or reference somewhere on a registry that has this information, but not hard-coded. And so that's my point. The rest, the tool that you are proposing here, I think is very, very valuable, so I applaud you for doing it, but please don't hard-code those values.
Thank you. Well, I was contemplating about this, and my point is, if ITF has to allocate another /3 block, that means that everybody already deployed IPv6 and we don't need NAT64 anymore.
Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there will be some other usage for it.
Yeah. Well, because this is how to relieve operators today when they are using Net 6.4 and people not calling to their help desk.
You know, back in the old days, in IPv4 days, right? There were class A, B, Cs. There were also D and E, right? D was multicast, E was future used. And people put into their code that only A, B, and C should be routed, right? And now we have all this E space that sits there and nobody can use it. That's because people hard-coded some values in the code. Just don't do that.
So then I should add the advice that if IETF adds another allocation to be the global unicast block, then people should fix this stuff. Because otherwise, if DNS 6.4, Net 6.4 goes in production without this, help desks will burn down in hell.
Well, the thing is to align the costs and the benefits here. If people on their website, on their DNS, put stupid stuff, they will pay the cost. They will fix it.
Yeah, but users will call provider, not the guy who is doing stupid things. And this is the problem. This is now reality. This is operational reality versus sort of like illusions.
That is no different than if today I put 127.0.0.1 in my DNS in IPv4. It's no different, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Andrew here from Liquid Telecom. Firstly, thanks, Jan, for a very interesting presentation. You asked if I think this is valuable. I definitely think it's going to be very valuable for us going forward, because I know that internally we're starting to look at a lot of NAT 6.4, particularly for our LTE networks that we're rolling out in Zambia, which at the moment, look, we've got V4 space, and quite frankly, if I can use the V4 space and deplete the pools a little bit faster, I'm going to use it. But there is coming a day when there simply won't be any V4, and I know it, and I'm going to have to go with a NAT 6.4 solution at that point. So I think this will be very useful. Just to respond as well to the previous comments, I fully agree with you that at this point, absence of a registry, etc., putting those checks in is actually extremely useful, because I know as an operator, not someone talking from theoretical perspective, but as an operator, with the amount of breakage out there and people doing crazy things without hard coding that in the absence of another method to do it. If there was another method, great, but there isn't. My help desk is going to get absolutely flooded. And I know the cost of adding more people to a help desk and the OPEX costs. That is going to discourage the company from actually rolling out V6. So to be able to simply add some hard coding in there, I'll take the risk. I'll take the risk of somebody deploying another prefix, because it's saving me tens of thousands of dollars to do so in OPEX costs. So I personally have no problem with you hard coding it, and I'll be doing the same thing until there's another mechanism.
Thank you. I think it was Sergey and then Mark.
Hi, I'm Sergey from NetArt Group. Jan, a question. Can you tell a bit more about the DNSSEC, about the breaking the DNSSEC? Because it was very unpleasant situation when I will get the response from my bank or even from my mail server with no certificate.
Well, it's...
So what are the possible way to solve the DNSSEC sign-in?
At the precise moment you start synthesizing the Quad A records for a domain that is DNSSEC signed by somebody else, then the validation breaks, because you cannot sign this Quad A because you don't have a key of that domain that signed the domain. So I think Google is working on some sort of a solution that is a potential solution, but currently in the current DNS 6.4 servers that are available, or you decide that you will validate, or you your people that is using NET64 will just not get the synthesized quad A records. And it is completely your decision, right? By default, the break DNSSEC is off. It's not breaking DNSSEC. If you want to everybody get the synthesized quad A record for the IPv4 content, then unfortunately, for this moment, you have to do it.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
There are two more.
Yes. Okay, we're going to take two more questions. Well, Kevin just came to the mic. I'll let that go also, and then we are closing. But you know, Jan is here until Wednesday. He has an email. He's physically present.
You should not put me at the end. You should not put me at the end.
And then we can continue during the opening cocktail too.
Okay.
So, okay, two more questions.
We are standing between you and the beer.
But it starts at 7 o'clock. What's the problem?
Yes, okay,
So anyway,
let's talk.
Mark Elkins, you only gave me 79% when I went and checked one of my websites. But then I realized if people put their minds many, many years ago, there used to be a little turtle that you could go to, and in V6 it used to move, and in V4 it just sat there. And I've got a tux that will jump up and down if it's V6, which is why I got 79%. So they are different, yes. At one time we used to stick in the unallocated blocks of IPv4 address that hadn't been allocated, so that we wouldn't do well, if it was sort of used, it wouldn't happen. We couldn't route to it and stuff like that. And I'm sure an occasion where that was from Kimry, where you could do a BGP download from Kimry or something like that. So I'm sure you could do the same sort of thing for that sort of static stuff. But don't you want to set your clients rather than clients as any, just set your clients as anything with 2001, 2002, 2003 instead? With a little mask and stuff. Wouldn't that have fixed it?
Yeah, well, Sander is watching the webcast. Sander, did you put this down? we need to add this stuff. Thank you. Kevin.
Thanks, Jan. Kevin Chege, Internet Society. Two questions.
I cannot hear you. Yeah, now
Can
it
you hear me
works.
now? Okay. Kevin Chege, Internet Society. Thank you for the presentation, very informative. Two questions. I am very curious as to why there are so many records as : 1, : FF, the non-routable IPv6 addresses. Is it possible that there is maybe a bug with some of the people? Are they all hosted by the same provider, and maybe there's a default setup? No, okay. And the second question is, if I want to set up my own NAT64 open source solution, what are the hardware requirements that I need? What type of CPU and so on?
Okay, so for the first question, the solution is Tamon and his team with educating people about IPv6 and maybe putting in the course that don't put anything stupid like this in your quad A record, because people put the quad A record up, they don't know what they're doing, right? They just know they need to deploy IPv6, they have no idea what to do, and they put whatever is first. So, here we don't have a cure other than education. For the second one, what is the hardware that you need to put together? It depends how many sessions you want to get through, how much traffic you want to put through. For testing, if you want to do very cheap testing, use YOL, that is Linux free as a kernel. If you put up a decent hardware, it will allow you to put some decent traffic through. If you want to go with some serious amount of traffics, then I don't know, ASR1K is quite good with this. I have Palo Alto 4050 that can do lots of stuff, and 3020 in the lab that I did not load even on 1%. So usually it's like, what usually people do is they set up in the lab something on Linux, see if all the functionalities are working correctly, and fix their sites and everything to the point where everything works over NAT64. They start understanding what they need, and then when they are buying equipment, they ask in the tender exactly what they need, so the vendors can offer them the right solution. And this is actually quite interesting because you can do some complex stuff, and Andrew will now start laughing probably. You can actually scale this, because if you put one net64 and one DNS64 with certain net64 prefix, when this machine starts being overloaded, you can put another one and another DNS64 that is creating quad A's with different net64 prefix and directing traffic to the different net64 box. And you redirect traffic between them just by giving different DNS64 resolver to your clients. And you can stack them up as many as you want. If you anycast them, even better, right? So there are many ways how to scale this thing. I personally hope that we will be over this soon. People will need to deploy IPv6, so less and less traffic will go to IPv4 services. And the exit strategy is that we switch off net64 as soon as possible. But in the meantime, we need to do all these hacks and moments of betrayal and go through all 6 degrees of inner turbulence and just do it. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for all my panelists, speakers of the day. I would just now like to close this day and invite you to the opening cocktail, which will be at 7 o'clock in the garden of the Sofitel. You have shuttles that are available to go back to your hotel, and shuttles that will take you from your hotel back here. So just check the date, the time at the registration. I'll see you also. The dress code is casual, smart, beachwear, and then we'll just enjoy a network. Round of applause for you, and see you tonight and tomorrow.